Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
So let's just say you have an idea for a book, whether it's fictional, whether doesn't matter what kind of book, you've got an idea. And maybe you're thinking, I don't know if I could do that. I've never written a book. How could I even put that all together? Well, therein lies this gentleman. You enlist the help of somebody that can walk that journey with you from the concept, the editing, even the cover art, all of that. And he joins us today, and we're gonna look at that journey with somebody that he helped from NFB Publishing. Mark Pogozinski joins us here on the program. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very well, very well. You have a guest with us. Who is that today?
I do. We have Katherine Ross with us, who was published with us, and it'd be easy if she just wanted to introduce her book and tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, the book is The Erasure of Mikhail Yeyegov. Mikhail was my grandfather, who I had never known because he disappeared when my father was 5 years old. And that disappearance caused a lot of problems for my father in that he felt that he was abandoned. My father had a lot of difficulty maintaining relationships with family because of that, and not only his mother, but his wife, and then myself and my brother and my sister, his children. And for decades, my mother and my father too were trying to find out what happened to Mikhail. So this is a memoir about that 70-year search for what happened to Mikhail, and how we finally found out, and what happened, and how that knowledge allowed our family to reconcile and forgive each other.
Wow. We're going to get into the writing process, but
Okay.
before we even go there, this story, did you go to Russia as well?
Yes, in
Tell us about that.
2005, right.
Tell us about that journey when you went to was St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg. My mother finally found out that Mikhail had been arrested and charged with being a spy for the United States. And at that time, he was living in St. Petersburg, and he was the manager of an ice cream factory. He had gone to Ohio State University for dairy sciences. So I believed that account. It made sense to me. But in 2005, I felt that I had enough information that I could go to St. Petersburg and see if I could find out what happened to him and maybe get some records, but I had no idea if I would get anything because it seemed to me that his erasure was pretty complete. But in 2005, my husband and I went there. We rented an apartment from a college professor from St. Petersburg, an arts professor. And I told her what I was trying to do. And she told me that she had no idea how to find out that kind of information. But she said at one point, the KGB office is nearby. Let's just start there. I didn't even know those KGB offices even still existed. So we went there. And when we walked in the door, there was a medallion on the floor saying that the building was constructed in, I believe it was 1933. And I thought, wow, this building was here when my grandfather was here. And we finally got to get in and talk to an official who was not real helpful initially and not very friendly. He kept saying that, well, first of all, he required that I prove who I was and what my relationship to Mikhail was. And I expected that. So I brought my father's birth certificate. I brought letters and information about my father's mother and their marriage. So I was able to convince him that I was related to him. But then he continued to tell me that the story that he was arrested was not true, that they didn't do that, that that would have never happened. And then later he said, and even if it did happen, he probably deserved it. And I said, well, can you just look and see if there's any records? And he said, there won't be any. And he said, come back in 10 days. He had already seen my visa and asked me when I was leaving the country. And that was in 7 days that I was leaving. And he told me to come back in 10 days. So we walked out, and I talked to my host, who was serving as also as my translator. And I said, I don't think they're going to even look. And she said, I don't think so either. And we went back to the apartment, and my host went home and then called me back later and said, we have to go back tomorrow. We just have to go back and get more information. And I think she had called and spoken to someone else who maybe offered to help. And we went back and we saw the same man who was was not really willing to look me in the eye. And then the door opened and a woman walked in smiling with a stack of papers. And she handed the papers to him and looked straight at me and smiled and walked out. And turned out that stack of papers was the record of my grandfather's arrest. He was arrested where he lived in St. Petersburg and brought to that very KGB office where he was incarcerated and where he was executed.
Wow.
So I got all the records. They would not give me any mugshots. They said they didn't have them, but I didn't believe them because they had excellent records. So that's the story of how I found out.
My gosh. I haven't dug deep into the book, but you've sucked me in.
Oh,
And I feel, and I guess that's what makes a great book. I feel like I'm you. And I
yeah,
see visuals of what I think based on movies and everything, what that office looked like, what
sure.
the feelings you had. And, I can't even imagine, being in that office and then that tensity. And it's like, well, when it's time to leave, will the door open?
Right. That's exactly what it felt like. And as I was sitting there, I was just thinking, just keep smiling. Don't show your anger. Don't get frustrated. Just keep smiling. And
Yeah.
that's the only way I could deal with the situation.
Was it your host translating for you?
Yes. Well, in the office, she would translate what the official was saying. To me, and then when I would answer, then she would translate back to him. But later on, I realized that he understood English perfectly well and knew what I was saying because he kind of tripped up and answered one response to something I had said. So I realized he was understanding the whole time.
Yeah, but that moment, you can't call him out on it.
No, of course, it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
Wow. Have you ever written a book before?
No. No, I've been a college professor for 40 years, so certainly I've written lectures, I've given lectures, I've written artists reviews for mostly for gallery publications, little things like that, but never attempted a book.
So I want to flip it over to Mark. When you heard this story, what were your first thoughts in terms of turning this into a book?
I thought it'd be a great fiction book when I first heard of it, and then the fact that it was real made it so much more intense. And Miss Ross is an artist too, so I thought, what a great way to help tell the story, to get it out there to help anyone who might be in a similar situation dealing with the loss, with an inability to connect with family members. And plus, this had the added, you don't want to say bonus, but an intensity where you would that is, out of nowhere. A person that we might know has this fantastic backstory, this amazing backstory, and then it had all this adventure emotion to it. And I thought it was just a fantastic story combined with the art. It was a pleasure to work on the book.
Wow.
Yeah, I just want to step in a moment because I've been a university professor in the arts. I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of students, particularly art students, are often motivated to go into the field of art because of some kind of trauma that they've had.
Hmm.
And they tend to be solitary people trying to work out who they are and why they are and what happened to them. And that's what I feel about my own experience. So I think that that thought was in my mind as I was writing too, that who was this for? Um, it was for other people who are in situations where they spend their lifetime working things out.
Hmm. Is that, Mark, when a book is written and it's been nailed, like it works. Do you feel like you're that person? Do you feel like you've jumped into the book and the story?
For me, I come in at the end, like writers like Miss Ross who put all the work in, and again, dealing with things beyond just writing a book, with the emotions that go into creating something like that. I'm at the end, so I clean up the technical things, but it starts in and for the most part ends with the writer, the artist, and it's again my pleasure to come in at the end and help them to get their story out to a wider audience. And especially a book like this, where we're dealing with such emotion and such trauma, I think it's an important book, especially for the author first part, but then for other people who read it, who can read into it what they're going through. And what Miss Ross did was pretty extraordinary, to go to Russia, which is not the friendliest of places, to deal with a KGB official. That's James Bond stuff. That's not a professor, an art professor, just trying to find out what happened to her grandfather. So I thought it was such a fantastic story, and everything that went into it. You had the plot of it, plot's the wrong word, but like the story itself, but then the emotion behind it. And that's what was really important to make sure that we got across.
What was the biggest challenge for you, Catherine, in writing the book?
Um, First of all, starting. My mother and my father, at the end of their life, both separately asked me to tell the story somehow. My mother specifically asking me to write about it. And finally, by the time I retired from teaching and it was the beginning of the pandemic, I started feeling like I needed to do this for my family. Um, it because it is our family story and it was so emotional, it was very difficult for me to sit down and stick with it. I would write for a few days and then I would put it away for a couple of months and then come back to it because it was overwhelming and it brought back so much that I had pushed into the background. So that was primarily the challenge. I had a friend, she's still my friend and colleague from the Art Institute of Chicago, Maud Lavin, who is a very well-known nonfiction writer and poet. And she encouraged me through the whole process. It took me about, I think, 4 years. And she pushed when she wasn't hearing back from me. She would say, "What's going on? What are you writing now? Send me some stuff." And I wouldn't have finished it without her because she kept me going.
Wow. There's a lot of emotion going through here. As I'm, it's like, seriously,
Yeah.
of course you have the emotion of finding the fate of a close relative who you never met, but
Yeah.
still very much connected to your family and affected your father. Then you also have the fear of dealing with the KGB.
Yeah.
Even just the trip to Russia alone would be, you'd be on eggshells in general. And then you have that, um, and so much swirling around. So I can, it's so reasonable, Catherine, to understand that you couldn't just purge this book out and get it done.
No, no, but especially with going to Russia, there were some really good things about it too. There were bad things. We got mugged. Uh, we almost didn't get out of the country because they stopped my husband and wouldn't let him get on the plane, and it was a mess. But the good things were the people I met, the Russians who wanted to help me. I had a student in Chicago who was an exchange from Moscow, who worked in my department for a semester. And I told her the story, and she said, "Give me his information, give me everything you know, and I'll try to dig up some things." Her mother and her aunt went to the KGB archives in Moscow and dug up a lot of information that was illegal for them to take out. And they hid in the stacks, copying down the information on paper and snuck it out. And they sent it to me. And even the woman who was my contact and who we rented the apartment from, she said to me that everyone in Russia has an experience in their background like mine. And she said, the only way you get information is if we help each other.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so that was very important coming out of that trip.
At face value, how did you even pick the host and feel comfortable?
Oh, that was so funny because I didn't know her at all. But another colleague at the Art Institute heard that I was planning on going there and needed a place to stay. And they have all kinds of regulations about getting a visa, about having to have your accommodations beforehand and having to have an invitation. And I didn't know anybody. And this colleague knew a ceramic artist and professor, which is what I am as well. And she said she rents out an apartment that she has, and she put me in contact with her. And that's how I found it. A lot of my research was happy accidents and just really good connections, both here and in Russia.
So take us through the journey of writing the book, from, encapsulate it, but the different
Oh,
steps
okay.
that you went through.
Okay. I felt like it was a lot of research, very similar to academic research and teaching. And because I had to find everything that my family had about my grandfather, where he was from, who his family was, his marriage to my grandmother, uh, looking back through letters and documents and finding a lot of blank space, blank places that didn't make sense. And so I think about 75% of the writing was constantly going back to these trunks of information that my mother had saved through the years. And also doing more information or investigation. I did the National Geographic Genome Project and found out about the way far back history of my father's family and my mother's family and put it in a public data bank and got a response from a man who thought his family may be related to my father's family. My grandfather changed his name when he came to this country, and we couldn't figure out why he chose the name he did, and it was Ross. And that's not a Russian name, it's Irish or Scottish. and couldn't figure out why he had that name. And this man had an explanation for that. He said that there's a region in Finland that is pronounced Ross. It's spelled differently. And he wanted to know from me if there was a connection to Finland. And through the Genome Project, I found out that there was. And so my thoughts are that perhaps my grandfather knew that he had ancestry in Finland and chose the name of that region for that reason, but I have no idea. And
Wow.
then later in doing more research and finding out even doing things like looking at records from a census and finding a 1930s census of my grandparents. And one of the questions they ask on the census is, what is your native language? And my grandfather answered Yiddish. And we had no idea that he was probably Jewish.
Wow.
No one in my family knew that. And I was raised Catholic. Um, and I asked all my Jewish friends, why would someone say that they were Jewish or spoke Yiddish if they weren't Jewish? And all of them said they wouldn't. There's no advantage to do that. If his language was Yiddish, he was Jewish.
Well, there was a reason. And it's
Well,
funny
yeah, absolutely, there was a reason.
when you trace history. I only found out this past summer that my uh, father's brother, my uncle, and I wasn't really close with him. He changed his name years ago. And I
Yeah.
found a newspaper clipping. He was arrested for a bank robbery. But wait, it was mistaken identity. The article detailed that it was incorrect, but it followed him around to the point where he just changed his first name because it just became problematic. And this happened, many decades ago.
Yeah,
Fascinating, fascinating story. My gosh. I don't even my head is still swirling with the KGB, and Mark, spot on with your comment about the a Bond movie. Yeah. Um,
yeah.
is this typical of the writing process for a lot of uh, books that are nonfiction, Mark?
I can't say. Everyone's process is different. Miss Ross is coming from a place where, she has to write this story. Her parents asked her to write it, and then
Sure.
it's incredibly personal. She's an academic too, so she probably knows that some people write an academic nonfiction book, like history. So it's straight research, maybe with some commentary. There's also creative nonfiction where you try to add a little bit more life to a nonfiction piece. So I guess it depends on what outcome you want. Whether it's to get your story out because you feel you need to, and then it turns into this incredible epic story, or like I'm writing a nonfiction book for academic purposes, a biography, something along those lines. So it would really depend on what you want your final product to look like.
And that whole journey, you help people like Catherine walk it, like every step of the way. Yeah, we don't know how to write books. We don't know the process. Mark, how does somebody get in touch with you?
We have a website, mfbpublishing.com, and there's a small form to fill out, which starts the process. And again, as she said, starting is the hardest part. Sitting down, having your idea, and actually starting to type, write, or however you want to start it. I encourage everyone, if they do have an idea, start, try. There's no harm in the attempt.
Fascinating talking with both of you today. I knew of your book, Catherine. Going to be honest, I had no idea how amazing it is, and did not know that it was at the request of your family to get this story out. If you want to learn more about the book, it is on the website, nfbpublishing.com. Final question, got about 20 seconds. Your background is art, Catherine. Did you get a chance to check out art in Russia at least?
Yes. Um, I was actually interested in seeing a lot of Soviet propaganda art. The the poster images and the agitprop imagery that was painted on trains, and the propaganda porcelains that were in public display, using art objects to re-educate the population. That was what they were trying to do at the time. So those are the kinds of things I was looking at.
Wow. Examples of that will be in her second book.
Oh, okay.
Seriously, I find that fascinating too. The propaganda and what was out there, the smoke and mirrors and everything.
Right.
Thank you both for being here today. Wonderful talking with you, and thank you for sharing your story, Catherine. And Mark, thanks for all the insight on the publishing.
Thank you. And thank you, Mark. It's nice to finally see you.
It's nice to see you too. It was my pleasure.
Thanks again. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.